Hey folks, welcome back. I thought today I would share with you some tips and tricks I picked up along the way in the greenhouse. We've gone from starting seeds to getting those going, and then now we're transplanting the starts into their own cups. So one of the first things I picked up on, remember in my last video I was punching a hole right through the middle of this cup. It makes a better hole if you go off to one side. It's a nice little round hole instead of like a torn up hole in the center. And then I also told you when placing them in the tray to make sure that the hole didn't get covered up by one of the ribs in there. But you see there's a little ridge around the bottom of the cup. That's going to hold it up off the bottom of the tray far enough to where this hole won't get plugged no matter where it's sitting, because the grooves in the tray allow the water to run underneath the cup, and then this ridge allows the cup just to be up a little bit to where that water will get to that hole. So those are the first things I learned. I tell you what, and I know I've said this before, there's nothing more therapeutic than being out here in the morning, especially if it's a little chilly outside, and you come into the greenhouse and it's just so nice in here, and I get the old classic rock playing, and it's just a really cool experience. I don't know how to explain it to you. So we're using these 8-ounce cups like we said before, and I don't know what the other brands come in, but this Best Choice brand, there's 17 cups in one sleeve there. There's 51 cups overall, and 17 cups is what I use in the tray, because I leave one opening in the middle right here on the end, so it's easier to water. So we need to get some soil mixed up. I just use one of these old laundry buckets. I got my big bucket of soil down here in the bottom, which is just a big lick tub is all it is. Cattle lick tub. Use them for a lot of stuff out here. And about 3/4 of this bucket is pretty much what I need for that. So you want to moisten your soil. You don't want it to be super soggy, but you want it to be nice and moist to the touch. And that's a lot less stress on your plants if there's moisture in your soil. If you're putting these transplants in dry soil, that's going to give a little bit of shock to them, and you might see them wilt down a little bit. You don't want that. You want to give them every advantage possible when you're transplanting those. Now your potting mix needs to be something that doesn't have really thick, heavy particulate matter in it. It needs to be pretty well composted. And we're using it's called a premium potting soil. It's made by Bacto. It's called light premium potting soil. But every now and then you're going to find like a little stick or something in it that hasn't composted all the way down. And I just throw those in the garbage. And the reason I don't leave those in is because when I'm transplanting these tiny young seedlings, if I go to push the dirt in around the seedling and one of them hard sticks is in there, it might damage the little stem on it, because those stems are pretty tender little stems. And I know I don't usually like to bore you with a lot of process. Today I'm going to do a whole tray for you so you can see exactly what I've done. I've had a couple comments that I don't show enough process, which I'm one of those people that like it when I'm watching a video if they just get to the point and show me what's going on and don't sit there and jabber the whole time. So I try not to do that. But for the sake of showing you the tips and tricks that I've come up with while doing this, I think we need to show you the whole process. And plus, you'll get kind of an idea how long this takes. because once you're proficient at it, it doesn't take that long to put a tray of seedlings together. And if you remember, we started all our seedlings in one of these cups. So I'm finding as I space them out when I planted them, I'm getting about 20 plants per cup, which is perfect. Just about right. And when we planted those, if you want to go back and see that video, we took my little pencil that I used to poke the holes in these cups. I used that to kind of move my seeds around in the cup a little bit when I was planting them. So it makes life a lot easier, and I'll show you when we start pulling the seedlings out of those cups. They're not quite so close together, and they come apart easy. Not that they don't come apart easy already, but I imagine if the plants were right next to each other, which I've had a couple that I've done that I missed, the plants were literally right on top of each other, I was still able to successfully get the roots apart just fine without damaging the seedlings. And you'll get a seedling that really tiny, no soil has held onto the roots. It's just like a little tiny piece of root left on it. And I just couldn't bring myself to throw it away, and I went ahead and potted it up, and that little son of a gun made it just fine. So you'd be surprised. You'd be putting one of these in one of these little cups, and you're like, oh man, that's not going to make it. Too much of the bottom broke off. But man, if you do this stuff right, keep this stuff moist, and they're very hardy little plants. Now, like I said before, again, I'm probably repeating myself, I only plant plants in here in the greenhouse that are not as easy to sow out in the garden. And by easy to sow, I mean if the seeds are really tiny, I'll plant them in here. But if the seeds are large, like squash or watermelon, corn, stuff like that, you just direct sow those right into the garden. They're not hard to do at all. And if you've got a screwed up back like me, you don't like doing a lot of bending over planting stuff, another little trick I picked up from my dad before he passed, he had a little piece of PVC pipe that was probably 3.5 feet long. It was probably a 3/4 PVC. I've got the electrical conduit, what I use. But about 3.5 foot long, and he'll go through with his rake and make his little furrow for his seeds to go in. And he takes that pipe in his seed, and he'll put that pipe where he wants his seed, and he drops the seed down that pipe. And he moves the pipe to the next spot, drops the seed down the pipe. So you're not bending over doing all that stuff. Then he comes back with either a small hoe or a rake, puts the proper amount of soil back over his seed, just barely taps it down, good to go, not a lot of bending over. Pretty cool. So let's get into planting. So you see we've already moistened this soil. Now what I like to do is come back and put water in each cup just to make sure it's nice and moist. Mixing it up in that big bucket, you know, chances are there could be a little dry spot in there, a little dry pocket. But this will work its way through all the way down that cup. And we're going to do this again when we're done. But I like using this little watering can because it's not like the big one that's blowing a lot of soil out of the cup. So you remember our tomatoes that we planted. This is beefsteak, Indeterminate beefsteak. So they're in a cup. There's about 20 plants in there, maybe a little more. And they've done really well. And you see they've got a set of their true leaves, and that's when you want to transplant them. You don't want to transplant them when they just got that first little set of leaves. You can see root already coming out that bottom looking for the water. So what I like to do, this is another one of my tricks I picked up on. And make sure I do this where you can see it. Comes right out of there. See, we got some good roots in there. So what I'll do is I'll find kind of an open spot here, like right here where there's not a plant, and I just open that up. Just like that. It makes See how I open that up? And I lay it right in my pan like that. So I can start pulling off seedlings one at a time off the end. That's what she looks like. So, get your cup. Use my little pie plate here. Waller your finger around in there a little bit, almost to the bottom. If you feel a big stick in there, pull it out and get rid of it. So I pull my first plant off, and when you're handling these plants, handle them by the root ball. You see how that came off just perfect. Got this big old long taproot in the middle. The weird part is when you go to put this in the hole, that taproot is like magnetic. Whenever it gets close to soil, it like sticks to it. So when you're trying to put it in, it's wanting to stick to the side. Probably nature's way of making sure that root gets water. But make sure you got it poked down inside. And then I push the root ball of the tomato. Don't put a lot of pressure on the stem. As far down as I can get it. And then I use 4 fingers in the cup. So that helps me center that plant in the cup pretty good. And I did what I don't like to do. I like starting clearing the back. And that way I'm not having to reach over things I've already planted. But we'll waller that out. Oh, there's a big old stick in there. I missed that when I filled that cup up. Like I said, the reason I take those out is because when I'm pushing the soil together, that stick might get in there and poke this really tender stem. You don't want to hold these by the stem, because if you crush it, the plant's dead. Some people hold them by the leaves, but I don't even like doing that. But by the root ball, you're fine. So you poke that down in there. Make sure it's as deep as you can get it. Because remember, all them little hairs along the stem of that tomato are going to grow new roots. So once you get fairly proficient at this, those come off real easy. You think a tomato that big and planted that tight in that little cup would be all root bound and hard to get apart. But it's really not. They come apart real nicely. So we got, I'll show you here in a little bit, we got most of the deer fence up around the garden. And we're probably going to be planting the middle of May before we even think about putting tomatoes out in the garden. And we'll even play that by ear. Of course, when that time gets close, we'll look out at the 10-day forecast and make sure there's nothing that's really crazy going to happen overnight. And if there is, we'll leave these babies in the greenhouse for a little while. And if they're doing good in here and they're not getting really leggy and crazy in the trays, just for insurance, I'll leave it in here a little bit longer. So you can see this seedling right here, very tiny. And just barely any dirt on that root. But you know what? That'll come up just fine. Let me lay that back there for a minute. I didn't get my hole in here. Of course, you're not going to plant that one as deep because it's not very big. So we'll push a little dirt to begin with down in the hole. And see how tiny that is? You're going to come out tomorrow and that's going to be just fine. It won't be wilted down or nothing. So let me tell you a few things about this unheated, uninsulated greenhouse. If you remember from our greenhouse build, the only thing we have on the walls of this greenhouse is the plastic greenhouse film. And it's 6 mil, supposed to last 4 to 6 years on a greenhouse, and it's not that expensive. So because it's thin and we're not insulated, your greenhouse is much more susceptible to cold weather. If it was insulated, it wouldn't be so bad on a night that was near freezing, like 30 degrees, 31 degrees, like that. It would probably still stay above freezing in here if this was an insulated greenhouse. But since we're uninsulated, you got to watch it close. You're watching your forecast every night to see what's going to happen. And if you're getting close, you need to make sure your greenhouse is buttoned up. All the windows closed, and a heater. Well, one of my fails that I had with this greenhouse is thinking that a heat lamp would do more than it really does. Because I had a heat lamp in here and then eventually 2 heat lamps. And for the starting tray, which I had right underneath the heat lamps, I had them hanging from the shelf above, and they were hanging about this high and only about that far from the seedlings. And the starting tray did fine. I didn't lose any seedlings in the starting tray, and it worked, and we even got down to like 24 degrees one night and everything was fine. Well, the mistake I made was the first 2 trays that I planted, I believe those are the ones we did the video on, I put them right above, on the shelf above the heat lamps, thinking that there would be enough heat come up radiant from those heat lamps just to keep those 2 trays warm. Wrong. I lost some tomatoes in that freeze. So lesson learned. So what I did is we had a little space heater that I bought Kelly to put in her office underneath her desk. And at her current job, she doesn't need it, so it was here at the house. And the little space heater has a fan in it. So you're getting more heat per watt than you are out of the heat lamp, because you have a fan blowing the heat out and constantly moving the air. And I put the fan over in one corner, and it faced it long ways in the greenhouse, so it actually create kind of a circulation of air as it's blowing. And that has worked out so much better. So got rid of the heat lamps, put that space heater in here, and I originally had it on that thermal cube that I showed you for the heat lamps I had in here. So it would come on at 35 degrees and go off at 45 degrees. Well, the problem I had with that was when it would get up to 45 degrees in here, that thermal cube would shut off the heater, and then the temperature would dip again fairly quickly because we're uninsulated, and it took too much time to recover. So I found if you run this thing constant, starting in the evening when it's necessary, there's no recovery time, and it'll actually keep up. It'll stay ahead a little bit and keep up. So instead of the thermal cube, I've got it on a timer. So on the nights that it's going to dip down, even down to 40, I'll make sure that that thing's on. And at about 9 o'clock at night, 9:30, that heater will kick on. And it's been keeping the greenhouse probably 20 degrees above the outside temp. And that's on that side of the greenhouse where the heater is, and the heat comes out and obviously goes up due to convection. And on this side of the greenhouse, it's been holding it probably 10 to 15 degrees higher than the outside. So either way, it's working out either side of the greenhouse that I got stuff on. It's been okay. And then I have a fan in here because, again, with this little space and it being all greenhouse film, when it gets 80 degrees outside, if you didn't have a fan and vents and stuff in here and keep the windows, I keep the window and the door open and the window back here that I put in open by the fan. If I rely just on the vents up top that I put in, it gets way too hot in here and you'll kill plants. So I leave the windows open, and when it, like again, when it stays above, well above freezing, I leave them open all night. Like last night it got down into 40 outside. It was probably 50 to 55 in here, depending on which side of the greenhouse you were on. And everything was just fine. The other thing that helps out a little bit is indoors you don't get the frost. You'll get the cold, but you don't get the icy, frosty stuff because you don't have the same moisture in here as you do outside. We got a couple extra plants here. That little one, that'll grow too. So I'll have to make me another cup. Don't want to waste anything that's living here. Some people would say, oh, you got 4,000 tomato plants. What the heck you worried about one little tomato for? Well, I have a tray up here that I put my extras in. And then that's a little bit of insurance. If something dies in my main tray, I just pull it down and put it in there. I'm just putting that over there for now. And I'll use up all of this soil that come out of the original cup. Put a little more in here. And I like to fill it. You got this top shoulder on the cup right here. I fill it to that shoulder line. Pre-water that a little bit. And the problem with doing things out of sequence is what I just did is I forgot to put the hole in that cup. And that's bad news because then that plant will drown. So that's another trick I picked up on when I'm doing processes, and it would work with any process you do. A good tip is to finish all of one process before you start another. I found that if I do things and try to do them in an order, I'll leave out one of the processes. So I'll grab a cup and I'll fill it full of dirt without punching a hole in the middle. So I've found some cups like that. Luckily I found them. But if you punch all the holes at once, you know you've got them all because you're just doing one at a time and your mind's not going on to something else. So when I do my cups, I'll punch all my cups all at one time and throw them in here. Then I'll fill them all at one time. So I don't miss any steps. So remember I told you we're going to throw some more water on them, and that's what I'm doing now. And that just kind of set the soil around those little roots. It'll close up any of those little air gaps that might be in there because the soil gets pretty fluid when it's wet. And that's what we're doing. We want it to settle all down around those roots. So I've had 100% success rate other than that freeze with my transplant. Like I said, the tiniest, dinkiest little plants I threw in a cup took off. All right, we got those watered. I have 2 extra. I'm going to put this one up in the upper tray too. So now we label. So some people watching this, I put my camera on my wipes, are going to say, why don't you just write on the cups? Well, I do. When I did it in the starter tray, I did it exactly that. I wrote on the cups what type of tomato, what that is. But you'll see as I'm transplanting, I'm putting a label in every cup. And it may seem silly, but the reason I do that is your gardening is by trial and error. So once you plant this tomato in the ground, take it out of the cup and put it in the ground, and you got a bunch of tomatoes, you're not going to remember what tomato's what. And I want to know what tomato performs in my area and what tomato just really not making it. And I won't do that over 1 year. I'll do a couple years, and if it's just not working out for that tomato, I'll never plant it again. If I got a tomato that's a really prolific production, you know I'm going to plant that one again. I like some big slicing tomatoes. It seems like recent years those are hard to get. So one of my favorite tomato varieties is Better Boy. It's got like a perfect balance of sweet and acid. But like I said in one of my previous videos, for some reason the last 10 to 15 years tomatoes have been so finicky. I don't know what the deal is. So that's why I make these steaks. Long story short, or long story not so short, I can take the steak when I plant the tomato and put the steak by the tomato, and if it does really well, I can look and see what that tomato is, and I'll know, and I'll put it in my journal that, hey, this is the tomato I want to plant again. If one just really susceptible to disease or something like that, or doesn't put on a lot of fruit, and I'm going to do several of each variety, so maybe it's just a bad spot in that soil. So I'll know if all three just don't work out here, guess what? You're gone. That's why I do these. So once I get all that figured out, I won't need to do these anymore. But I do give a lot of plants away. And that's another thing that when I give you a little tour of the greenhouse there, you're going to say, what on earth are you going to do with all those tomatoes? Well, you make friends with them. Tomatoes are some of the most popular vegetables you can plant. People really enjoy tomatoes. Let's see, that was a beefsteak, Indeterminate. I also write whether they're determinate or indeterminate, because that determines where I plant them in the garden. Because I trellis my indeterminates, obviously, better than the determinates, because determinates don't keep on growing like the indeterminates do. So I always write that on the tag or the cup, what they are. So I'll put an I for indeterminate or D for determinate. Now one variety I had, let's see what it was. It was the Celebrity. The Celebrity tomato is semi-determinate, so it's kind of in the middle. It'll keep growing more than a determinate. It'll set fruit not at a, one shot. It'll spread it out over the season a little bit more. So that's a kind of an in the middle of the road tomato if you need something like that. So this is one of those processes that's going to take a minute, and I don't want to bore you with it. So I'll finish that up once I show you a couple other things. So another thing you want to do is, we got these tomatoes in my tray. Well, this isn't the tray I'm going to leave them in, because once you've got them full and you've got water in the tray, this tray is hard to move around because it's kind of flimsy. So I put my tray where it's going to go, and I will move all those tomatoes up here, and then I'll put water in them, about a ½ inch of water, to keep them bottom watered. So you can see all the tomatoes I've done. This is some ones I did a couple days ago. Once they get in their own pot, they take off like crazy. These are some I've done, like I said, a while back, and man, look at them. They're going like crazy. Now these are some of the ones I lost in the frost. I got 2 tomatoes that survived out of that variety. But I've came in and I've put seeds in these cups, 2 or 3 seeds, so you can see they're already sprouting. So whatever doesn't sprout, we'll use that cup for something else. But it looks like I've got something pushing in all of them. Got some San Marzanos up there. We got some peppers already up here. Another thing I found out, the bottom shelf, when you have stuff on the top shelf, get some shade. So if you do put something back here, I'd put maybe an individual pot back here against the wall, so it will get some sun, but I wouldn't put a full tray here. So that's kind of a setback, but I kind of use this bottom as my work surface anyway. So we'll take these once these trays dry out a little bit. Because they're on the north side of the greenhouse and the sun kind of comes in this way, I believe these are going to get plenty of sun. As you can see, there's sun on that tray there, depending on where the sun is on the rafters and stuff like that. So on the north side of the greenhouse, I think this lower deal is going to be fine. But we shall see. If not, we'll move them up here, and we'll move all this stuff that's up there down here. And we'll continue to use this as our work surface. Now, once all these tomatoes are planted out in the garden, I'm going to put me a tub down here. Maybe a couple tubs in here. And I'm going to grow some tomatoes in here. And those tomatoes will grow up through these wire shelving. And that'll act as kind of a trellis to keep it from falling over. And if I plant an indeterminate tomato in there, it'll get clear up through this one and be up here in the roof area. Now those indeterminate tomato plants, if you just let them take off, they will take over this greenhouse. So you can plant, or not plant, but you can prune tomatoes very easily. You can prune them all year long. You can cut off any part of that tomato and it's not going to hurt it. If you got a branch going crazy off somewhere, just clip it off. It won't hurt nothing. And we're going to put maybe 2 or 3 tomatoes in here. We're trying to extend our growing season further into the fall, because once it starts getting colder, your tomatoes will stay green. They're not going to ripen up for you. However, if you take them into the house, you take green tomatoes in the house, they will ripen. They won't be as good as a vine ripened tomato, but they'll be good. We may even make, before we've made green taco sauce out of the green tomatoes, kind of like using tomatillos, but the same thing. But that's what we're going to try to do. And if we want to keep those indeterminate tomatoes obviously on the north side of the greenhouse, because if you had them on the south side of the greenhouse, they're going to shade everything else out in here, because like I said, they'll get clear to the roof. So let's talk electricity. You can see our little space heater we ended up putting in here in the greenhouse when we figured out those heat lamps weren't going to cut it in here. So we've ran electricity from the shop. I think you can see that, just standard orange electrical cord out here to the greenhouse, because we didn't have any electricity run out. So people get real leery of running electricity on extension cords, and you should. Like people that have like animals and stuff like that out in little barns, they'll run an extension cord out there and put 15 heat lamps all around the barn for all their little animals. Well, you end up burning your barn down. So there's horror stories of people out there that have overloaded their circuits and have burnt things down, and it's very tragic. But as long as you follow some simple rules, you're going to be okay, and you don't have to be an electrician to know what those rules are. So originally I just grabbed the cord out of the shop. I think it was a 16 gauge cord, and I looked up the specs on that cord, and it doesn't only go by gauge, it goes by how many feet you're running the cord. So even though if you look up the available amps on a 16 gauge cord, they're not much, and the longer the cord goes, it goes down. So originally when we had the heat lamps, I was fine. I think with the length of cord that we had out here, we could do about 10 amps. So being a 250 watt heat lamp, you take your watts and you divide that by your volts, which is 120 volts, which is your standard household current. And that comes out to just a fraction over 2 amps. So we were fine. I was not overloading that circuit. And even when we went to 2 heat lamps, I was still under 5 amps. So we were still okay on that cord. Now, when we go to a space heater, which is 1500 watts, that's quite a bit of difference. So I'm like trying to do the math in my head, and I'm like, oh, we might be getting a little close. So I got rid of that cord, and I ran a 12 gauge cord out here, and I even shortened that up, because I think I started with a 25-foot cord, which would have been fine. But like I said, if I shorten the cord, I get a little bit better on the amps. So we shortened that up. So I did the math on the space heater, which is 1500 watts, and you're still dividing by the 120 volts, and that came out to about 12.5 amps, which was fine for our 12 gauge cord that we ran out here. So that's the math that you do on your watts and your volts and your amps. So you take your watts, divide them by the volts, which is 120 generally, and that'll give you your amps that you're going to be pulling. So keep that in mind. Make sure you don't burn your stuff down. Now, because this is an uninsulated greenhouse like we talked before, we had put these automatic vents in, And in retrospect, I wish I would have did a lot wider vent up here. These vents, or these automatic openers, will handle 30 pounds. And I'm nowhere near that with just that little wooden shutter up there. So I was wishing that I did a bigger vent up here. So if you're going to build a greenhouse, build a big vent as you can and stay underneath the 30 pounds. And keep in mind, if you build a big door up here, that's not going to hold all the weight of the door. Half of your weight of your door or more is going to be hanging off the hinge. So that'll open a bit bigger door than you would believe. So it's only going to take a fraction of what the door weighs to push it out. And those open 18 inches. So with those small vents that I have up here, I'm supplementing with the door. It has a window that opens up, and I'd actually installed a window back here in the back, and that's where I put my fan, so it's pulling the little bit cooler air from the outside. With that being said, with an uninsulated greenhouse, you have to be a little more diligent. It may mean you come out here at night and close the windows, and it's going to mean you're going to come out in the morning and open windows so you don't overheat the place. And if you're going to be gone for an extended period of time, you need to have somebody come over doing that. And you're also going to need to check the water in the trays. If you look at here, we probably had a good 1/4 inch of water in this tray when we started this morning, and now that it's heating up in here, we are up to just a touch above 80 degrees. So we're starting to dry things out. So if you can figure you're going to be gone for 2 or 3 days, that's going to run dry. And I don't know if those cups would hold enough moisture for 2 to 3 days, and you'd start killing plants. So you might have somebody have to come babysit your plants. But it's a little labor intensive, but it's very satisfying, and like I said, it's very therapeutic, and I enjoy doing it. So we're going to wrap this video up. I've taken enough of your time, and I hope I helped you out a little bit, sharing what little tips I've learned out here. This is the first time I've ever had a greenhouse, so it's trial and error, and hopefully I erred and you don't have to. So we love you guys. Stay safe, stay healthy. If you want to keep seeing our videos, subscribe. If you know of other people that would benefit from our videos, go ahead and share our channel with them. We want to try to help as many people as we can. So till next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and come on back and see us at Mark Kelly Farm.